Hello everyone and welcome to this video podcast on the last days. My name is David and the title of this episode is Introducing and Designing Prophetic Timelines, with a subtitle of Timelines, Timelines, and More Timelines. This is episode 18. In the last episode, we laid out the 3 steps or insights into how to gain an intelligent opinion on when the Lord will come again, by first collecting, then classifying, and finally charting out all the signs of the times in chronological order, based on their color code of already fulfilled, being fulfilled, or yet to be fulfilled. And then I stated that these 3 steps would thereby provide us with a reasonable and plausible prophetic and sequential timeline to build upon in our future episodes, which is what I would like to do now by adding a 4th step to this process. So let's turn to that 4th step now. Notice that in step 3, we have gathered together and charted out all the signs of the times according to their color code of past, present, and future. But with this additional 4th step, our primary concern is with diagramming out in chronological order all those signs of the times that we have identified as yet to be fulfilled. For example, suppose we have identified on our fig tree 36 signs of the times that have as yet to be fulfilled. Now imagine we gather these 36 signs of the times into a basket and set out to number them 1 to 36 in sequential and chronological order. This sounds simple and straightforward, but we soon realize that this 4th step requires a great deal of gospel understanding pertaining to the end times, and that arranging these future signs of the times in chronological order is no easy task. In fact, one might simply scratch one's head and wonder, but how is this complex and seemingly impossible task to be done? Now, since there are numerous Latter-day Saint last days timelines presented on the internet, one might be tempted to ask, why not simply rely on someone else's timeline? I'll explain why President Harold B. Lee does not think this is a good idea in a minute. But first, let me give you an example of one of the many Latter-day Saint last days timelines so you'll have an idea of what I am referring to. In James T. Prout's book, The Last Days Timeline, he maps out a last days timeline from a Latter-day Saint perspective, covering some 3,000 plus years, beginning approximately in the year 0 AD and ending this timeline at the end of the millennium in the year 3000 AD. We can also add in the years 1830 as the date for the reestablishment of Christ's Church in our own day, as well as the current year of 2022, which date helps us identify as to where we are in this timeline. Notice that all the end-time events that we are interested in take place sometime in the future and are this author's attempt to diagram out in chronological order all the signs of the times that are yet to be fulfilled. So, from our perspective, this is step 4 in our efforts to gain an intelligent opinion on when the Lord will come again. Here then we have yet another example of a Latter-day Saint who has done a great deal of homework pertaining to an understanding of the last days for us. But the question remains as to how reliable is this timeline, as we seldom find any 2 Latter-day Saint authors or last days timelines agreeing with one another on the placement or meaning of this or that end-time event. In fact, there are several Latter-day Saint YouTube presenters who believe that Christ's second coming is imminent, with one presenter even suggesting that it is possible that Christ could return prior to this October 2022 General Conference. The title of his podcast is, Was This the Last General Conference? His reasoning for this possibility is twofold. First, in this past April conference, President Nelson failed to mention the coming October conference, which is something he normally does. And second, President Nelson seemed to be unusually sad this past conference, as though something was weighing heavily upon his mind. Now, this podcaster made it clear that this was pure speculation on his part, but nonetheless, he went on for over an hour trying to support this speculation. Again, setting future target dates based on impressions from conference talks coupled with signs in the heavens that happen to fall in line with this or that coming Jewish feast is not only foolhardy, but such speculation sets a target date on one's own credibility as well. In any event, let's turn to President Harold B. Lee's remarks pertaining to such speculations and our ill-advised reliance upon others' opinions and timelines pertaining to the latter days. In a 1973 Ensign article addressed to the priesthood brethren, titled Admonitions for the Priesthood of God, President Harold B. Lee admonishes the saints to do their own scriptural homework and not rely on secondary sources. As I read through these next few quotes, you will notice that President Lee appears to be a little frustrated and perturbed with the gullibility and indolent nature of some of the Latter-day Saint priesthood holders. He writes, "There are among us many loose writings predicting the calamities which are about to overtake us. Some of these have been publicized as though they were necessary to wake up the world to the horrors about to overtake us. Many of these are from sources upon which there cannot be unquestioned reliance. Are you priesthood bearers aware of the fact that we need no such publications to be forewarned, if we were only conversant with what the Scriptures have already spoken to us in plainness?" President Lee then continues his admonishments in these words, "Let me give you the sure word of prophecy on which you should rely for your guide, instead of these strange sources which may have great political implications. Read the 24th chapter of Matthew, particularly that inspired version as contained in the Pearl of Great Price. Then read the 45th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord, not man, has documented the signs of the times. Now turn to section 101 and section 133 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and hear the step-by-step recounting of events leading up to the coming of the Savior." Now I gather that President Lee's point in all of this is that if we are not to be deceived or misled by these secondary sources, then it is best to do our own homework by relying upon the Scriptures as our primary source. And in this instance, he has even given the priesthood holders 4 scriptural and last days timelines to begin their personal study with. Now we will be looking into each of these references and timelines in later episodes. But for now, I would like to refer to my own primary and secondary sources so that you know what my attitude and position is towards doing our own homework when it comes to these last days scenarios and timelines. By stating that the Scriptures, or standard works, are my primary source for collecting, classifying, charting out, and putting into chronological order all the signs of the times, I am probably not saying anything more than everyone else is saying. But what I will hold to is the stipulation that every prophetic sign of the times that presents itself within a Latter-day Saint timeline must have a scriptural reference attached to it, or else it is not truly a prophetic sign of the times in the scriptural sense of being a primary source. This does not, however, mean that I do not have a library of secondary sources. In fact, here are 10 of my secondary sources, all of which are Latter-day Saint authors, and some of which I have already referred to in earlier episodes. For those who have asked, the best secondary source for a general overview of these latter days, in my opinion, is Gerald N. Lund's excellent book, The Second Coming of the Lord. The best doctrinal overview, in my opinion, is Elder McConkie's book, The Millennial Messiah. And the best book listing the signs of the times is David J. Ridge's book, 100 Signs of the Times. All these secondary sources are each useful in their own way, and I have read them all and many of them several times through. But they are useful only as long as I remember that they are secondary sources only and are not to be treated as though they were a primary source with scriptural status. I would also like to make special mention of Hiram L. Andrews's Gospel and Doctrinal Writings, particularly the 3 volumes shown here. But what has also proven to be extremely interesting and instructive have been the 2 series of lectures that he gave in 1989 and 1991, wherein he covered many topics and timelines pertaining to these latter days. I've listed 6 of these lectures here, but there are many more since there were some 40-odd lectures in total. In any event, if you go on YouTube and type in Hiram L. Andrews, the majority of these lectures will appear. Now again, I must remind you that Dr. Andrews' lectures are not primary source material, but a secondary source that I have found extremely helpful. Nonetheless, following the lead of President Harold B. Lee, my main reason for presenting these series of episodes on the last days is to teach everyone on how to do their own homework when it comes to gaining an intelligent opinion on when the Lord will come again, beginning with these 3 steps and leading to the 4th step, wherein we diagram out our own prophetic timelines based on primary source material, the Scriptures, and not secondary sources. So let's turn to that 4th step now. The first thing I would like to point out is that in diagramming out prophetic timelines, there are 6 key parts or elements that I believe play an indispensable part in presenting a legitimate last days timeline. These 6 elements include, first, what I am going to refer to as prophetic blockchains; second, prophetic themes; third, prophetic markers; fourth, prophetic time frames; fifth, a prophetic black box; and sixth, the rule that there are to be no future target dates. We begin then with our prophetic blockchains, which consist in an unspecified number of rectangles or containers of different lengths but the same height. Next, we have an unspecified number of prophetic themes, which determine the number of blockchains. This is followed by an unspecified number of prophetic markers, which determine the length of the blockchains. There are 3 classes of prophetic markers or signs of the times: past, present, and future. Then we have the prophetic time frames, which designate an unspecified amount of time and set the alpha and omega, or beginning and end, of any particular time frame, making it possible for one to locate where we currently are in that timeline. Next, we have the prophetic black box, which is placed between present and future prophetic markers as a reminder of 2 big unknowns: the unknown time frame associated with God's 6,000-year prophetic timeline, and the unknown number of future signs yet to be fulfilled. And finally, we have the reminder that there are to be no future target dates associated with the signs of the times that are yet to be fulfilled. On a larger screen, let's lay these 6 key elements out in linear fashion, beginning with our 3 prophetic blockchains, followed by our 3 prophetic themes, and then 9 prophetic markers. Notice that blockchain number 2 is much smaller than blockchain number 3, simply because of the number of prophetic markers that it contains. Another important point is that each of these prophetic markers must be supported by at least one scriptural reference before it can be legitimately placed in the timeline. Next, we have our prophetic time frame, in which, for illustration purposes, we will assign the alpha, or beginning date, of 1830 A.D. to commemorate the establishment of Christ's church in these latter days, and assign the omega, or ending date, to the end of the millennium, and to a time when there will be time no longer. Notice that we have attached scriptural support for both these dates. Also notice that this time frame covers a span of 1,170 years, which means that we will be including signs of the times in this timeline that are already fulfilled, currently being fulfilled, and yet to be fulfilled. This time frame, along with these past, present, and future prophetic markers, makes it possible for us to identify where we are in this particular timeline. Next, we have our prophetic black box placed strategically between those signs of the times that are currently being fulfilled and those that are yet to be fulfilled, as a reminder of our two big unknowns spoken of earlier. And finally, we have the important and needed reminder that there are to be no future target dates associated with any yet to be fulfilled signs of the times. With these 6 key elements properly displayed, we now have before us a template for all the future prophetic timelines that one might wish to create. It would be good, however, for one to both memorize and practice drawing out this template with all 6 of these key elements included, for by doing so, one will be able to do one's own homework when it comes to developing and presenting these last days timelines, and not be dependent upon someone else's timeline. In line with President Harold B. Lee's admonition to the priesthood brethren, I have now presented to you a last days 4-step guide for doing your own scriptural homework, and not relying upon secondary sources or becoming dependent upon other people's last days timelines. In review then, this 4-step process begins with first collecting the signs of the times directly from the scriptures, with each fig leaf representing a sign of the times. Then, with step 2, we set out to classify these signs of the times according to a orange, yellow, and green color code, thereby identifying those signs of the times that are already fulfilled from those that are being fulfilled or are yet to be fulfilled. Once this is completed, we can then move on to step 3, wherein we are now able to chart out a prophetic sequential timeline by simply gathering together all these signs of the times according to their color code and time frame of past, present, and future. With these first steps completed, we'll then be in a position to move on to step 4 and diagram in chronological order all the signs of the times that have yet to be fulfilled. And by making use of the template shown here, we will be able to take advantage of all 6 key elements that ought to be a part of every last days timeline. Again, my goal in all these episodes is not to do your homework for you, but to show you how to do your own scriptural homework more effectively by providing you with insights, guidelines, and tools that simplify what would otherwise be a daunting task, which is why so many Latter-day Saints rely on others to do this homework for them, and why President Lee was admonishing us all not to fall in that trap, but to avoid the errors and speculations of others by doing our own scriptural homework. And I hope this last day's 4-step guide encourages you to make that effort. As we wind down this episode, and in preparation for the next episode, I would like you to name 3 things that come immediately to your mind when you think of the last days. Now, if you wouldn't mind sharing these ideas with other viewers, then it would be helpful if you would list these 3 things within the comments section of this episode. It will be interesting to see what everyone comes up with. We end then with another prophetic timeline alert, and that is this: that in order not to be deceived or misled by the speculations and timelines of others, we should each do our own scriptural homework and get started today. In other words, if we are to gain an intelligent opinion on when the Lord will come again, then the sooner we get started collecting, classifying, charting, and diagramming out the chronological order of the signs of the times, the better. With the template laid down on how to design a prophetic timeline, it is now time to apply that template to an introductory timeline. And so it should not surprise you that our next episode, episode 19, is titled An Introductory Last Days Prophetic Timeline, with a subtitle, once more, of Timelines, Timelines, and More Timelines. Thank you for watching. Push the like button if you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to push the subscribe button. Until next time, stay vigilant, for ye know neither the day nor the hour of his coming.